this is Faith at Faith&books, and I'm going to do the autumnal tag. I wanted to do this tag outside, but there's just too much going on, and I'm afraid as the week gets started, I'm just not going to have time to do it in the morning because it's dark now and cold outside, and the little guy's been waking up early, and it just seems like there's so much to get done. I just haven't. I think I need to try to just carve out time on the weekends and then upload. Anyway, this is the autumnal tag, and it's really simple. It was originated by Karen Evans, and you just have to list 13 books that make you think about autumn. And she did 13 books that were sort of spooky or mysteries or ghost stories, that sort of thing. And then I saw it originally at Bill Ruttenberg's, and he did more a eclectic thing of sports because he coaches in the fall, and history, events that happened in the fall, things that make him think of teaching school because he's a school teacher, and that sort of thing. So I decided, I really had fun pulling together this list of books because I love the fall, and there's so many things that go on during the fall that I just love. You can hear the 4-year-old, he's playing outside. We have the windows open, it's a beautiful day. And I'm kind of going to be a Catholic nerd here because the fall is really replete with wonderful saints' days. And I really I'm a saints geek, kind of. Not really, that's flattering myself. But I do love that, every day you can find out what most days, what saint's feast day it is or memorial, and then you learn a little bit about history, and you learn a little bit about theology and someone who did something heroic and selfless, and so I enjoy that. So I'm going to include a couple of those days in each month. And I'm going to start with September and Labor Day. Now, I really had fun thinking of this tag, but then when I went to gather all the books, I discovered how many books I don't know where they are. I don't know if they're lost in the house or somehow they're just gone. But this first one I was thinking of Labor Day, and my family comes from out of labor. I have a great-great-grandfather who was Samuel Gompers, who started the AFL. I've said this before. And then my father's father, who died when I was 3, was one of the originators or founders of the CIO. So on both sides of my family, I'm AFL CIO. And so I could have gotten a biography or a book about them or something, but I was trying to go for nonfiction, and I made it mostly that my last choice is nonfiction, but I went with fiction. And so I wanted to show you North and South, because in the last tag, the favorite penguin, I said Mary Barton by Elizabeth Gaskell, but North and South is also about labor, and it's got features strikes and contention between management. Mr. Thornton, the owner of the factory. I'm sorry, I'm trying to do something with my laptop. Anyway, North and South is, Gaskell wrote it in response to criticism of Mary Barton that it only represented one side, the working class side. And so North and South was written in response to that, and it includes the working class, and then Margaret's kind of the bridge between Thornton and, his name is escaping me, but the guy who sort of represents the union. I'm sorry. Anyway, I had this book by my bed for years. For years. I read it way before the miniseries came out, and I loved it. And I used to have this really big multi-tiered or multi-shelf bedside table, and it would be crammed with books, and North and South was on there for years, and it really collected dust, and I finally got fed up with it, and I got a tiny little table now, so it's like minimalism by my bed. Where did the book go? I can't find it. I've searched the house. I can't find North and South. But my first selection for Labor Day in the fall, which sort of unofficially begins the fall, right? School starts, pools close, would be North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell. All right. Then the next day, I have 2 alternate days here that came up, and this is really tied to BookTube because I started this channel last October for Victober. That was the thing that really pulled me in. And during that month, it also happened to be when John Henry Cardinal Newman was being canonized over in England. And so I got really into that because I have a ton of books about him because my grandfather was really into him. So I was all excited about this. And I didn't know that he had written novels. So he was a Victorian, and he wrote a Victorian novel. So I read one of his novels on my Kindle called Callista. And in that book, which is set in, I guess it's the 300s AD in North Africa, during a persecution of the Christians. And there was this bishop, who he gives him a different name, like his Roman name, but in the book, but it's Saint Cyprian. And Saint Cyprian's feast is in September. So I don't quite understand it because it came up on 9/11 as his feast day, but then on the 16th, it was the feast of Saint Cornelius and Saint Cyprian. So is it a different Cyprian? Maybe there was more than one Cyprian, but they both come up in September. And he had never been on my radar before that book. So YouTube or BookTube is the one that clued me in, is a thing, the force that clued me in on this book by St. John Henry Cardinal Newman called Callista, a Victorian novel, and it features this saint that I had never really picked up on or thought about. But alternatively, a couple years ago, I read the book Helen. Was it Helen or Helena? Helen by Evelyn Waugh, also on my Kindle. Absolutely exquisite story. This one's set more like in the 400s AD, and it's I think mostly in like the Macedonian era. But it's about Helen, the mother of Constantine. And, the legend has it, she went to the Holy Land to find the true cross, and she did, according to the legend. And that feast day, or that day we commemorate that, is September 14th. So, my reading recent reading the last couple of years has sort of, taught me about saints feast days that come up in September. So I'm going to say Callista and Helen by Evelyn Waugh. And then the next book that reminds me of, and I actually have a copy of this one, is jumping from the Catholic days to the Jewish holidays that fall in the fall. And in fact, Rosh Hashanah just started Friday night. And then there's Yom Kippur, and then after that is a Sukkot. And I remember reading this, All of a Kind Family by Sidney Taylor. I read it out loud to my kids several times, and when the first time I read it aloud to them, parts of it were familiar, and I realized I had read it as a child, but I just didn't recall the name of the book. But in this, it's a charming story about a family of girls, all of a kind, and they live in the turn of the last century New York, and they're Jewish immigrants, and and it just talks about their life, and in it they talk about how they celebrate the Jewish holidays, and I just remember especially how they celebrated Sukkot or Sukkos, because the father built a hut in the alley, and they had to eat their meal. It wasn't on the fire escape. No, I'm pretty sure it was in the alley. They had to, for the, what is it called? Is that the Feast of Booths? No, I don't know, but during Sukkot, you have to eat your meals outside. It's like a harvest festival, so you have to build a little hut, and you eat all your meals outside. I just remember that from this book. It was really charming. I highly recommend this book as a read aloud to kids, or if you just feel like reading something cozy. That's a really nice book. I've got water gurgling over there. Oh, my house always has strange sounds. All right, so then the next one I'm going to say for number 4 is I'm going to jump to Michaelmas. So in, we call it the Feast of the Archangels, but in England they call it Michaelmas. And they always, if you ever read any book set in British boarding schools, boys' boarding schools, they always talk about Michaelmas term. And so that reminded me of kind of the granddaddy of all those types of books, Tom Brown's School Days. It's by somebody Hughes. Is his name Thomas Hughes? But it was written back in like 1841. I'm sorry about the gurgling in the pipes. Can you hear that? Figures it would. I don't know what's going on. Someone's taking a shower somewhere in the house. Anyway, Michaelmas. So yeah, Tom Brown's School Days. And that I'm really sad I cannot find that book. I remember reading it, and I remember I was married, so I've read it at some point in the last 32 years. And really enjoying it. It's set in the rugby school, which is where rugby, the sport, actually originated. And it's sort of a quintessential Victorian children's story about the escapades of all these boys at this school. For prestigious boys, they go on to Oxford and Cambridge, you know. Anyway, it's a great story, and it's sort of the granddaddy of all. I guess the last most popular iteration was the Harry Potter books, but it's that sort of thing. So, but I don't know where my book is. I think it was like my grandfather's book or something. I remember reading an old book, you know. Where is it? I don't know. I was very sad about that when I couldn't find it. But anyway, that was number 4. Number 5 is October 1st. October 1st is the feast of Saint Therese of Lisieux, and this is her book, her famous book, The Story of a Soul. She's now a doctor of the church. She died when she was 24 of tuberculosis. She had been a Carmelite, so just lived this hidden life in the convent. But as she was dying, they asked her to write down her memoirs, and she did, and it was so inspiring and simple and profound and just gorgeous that it became really popular, and eventually it got published, and it became this worldwide bestseller. And this is the older translation. That gurgling is really distracting me. This is an older translation. There's a better one now, I think, that scholars say is a better translation from the French. Anyway, if you want to read a really inspiring, simple book, but very beautiful soul. And I remember, how many years ago was it? Maybe 15 or something. Remember, there was a best-selling book called The Happiness Project. I think the woman was Gretchen Rubin or something like that. She wrote a series of books. They were on the bestsellers. And she, even though she was completely secular, but she had a thing for Saint Therese of Lisieux. So I highly recommend this book, but maybe get the better translation. And then right on October 4th is my favorite saint, St. Francis of Assisi. So I can't let that go by without mentioning that. And I highly recommend St. Francis of Assisi by G.K. Chesterton. Just a rollicking, exuberant, quirky biography. This is a combination book, but October 4th, you know, St. Francis, he's my man. And this is a wonderful biography by a great man of letters. So that reminds me of the fall. Then I'll just skip to Halloween, and I can't find my single version edition of it, but MacBeth. I'm going to say MacBeth reminds me of Halloween because, I mean, you know, it's kind of a natural. It's got witches and a spooky castle, and there's ghosts, and there's murder, and there's madness, and all that stuff. But it also really reminds me of Halloween because my oldest son, when he first discovered Shakespeare, MacBeth was, I think, the first play he saw. He might have seen Midsummer Night's Dream at some high school or something, but we went to see this incredible version of MacBeth. It starred Patrick Page. It was just stunning. And he was over the moon with Shakespeare and MacBeth. He thought it was the best thing he'd ever seen. And Halloween came, and he decided to dress up as MacBeth. And it was so, I mean, he was like 7th, 8th, 9th grade, I'm not sure. He's almost getting too old to trick-or-treat. But what he did was he dressed up like MacBeth with the blood, and he had a sword and all. And and when he would say, instead of doing trick-or-treat, he would recite passages from Macbeth. It was the cutest thing. And so that always Macbeth really reminds me of Halloween. Every time Halloween rolls around, I think about that. Okay, and then I won't do So November 1st, Halloween is Hallows Eve, Holy Eve, because the next day is All Saints Day, and that's supposed to be a high holiday or a holy day. But I'll skip over that because I'm getting too Catholic on you. But November 1st this year is the day that we switch from daylight savings time to standard time. So that means it's going to start getting dark really early. And that, whenever that change comes in the fall, it always reminds me of Jane Eyre. It reminds me of the time in the scene in the book where Jane Eyre first meets Rochester and she's walking from, what's it called, Thornfield? She's walking from Rochester's estate. I think she's going to the post office in the village or something. But it was already dark at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. She's walking through the dark when Rochester comes back on his horse, and his horse gets startled by Jane being there in the road, and then he falls and he hurts his ankle. That's the scene where she meets him. And I'm always reminded of that when we have the time change, that scene. I don't know why, it just sort of got embedded in my memory, and I always associate the time change with that particular scene. So Jane Eyre, and that's perfect for, this time of year, I think. It's got an autumnal feel to it. Then my 9th book is gonna be, so November 2nd was my mom's birthday, and it's also All Souls Day, or if you're Mexican, you call it the Day of the Dead. And so it's when you remember your dead, right? Your family members that have passed. And but it was also my mother's birthday. Anyway, every November 2nd, I always go to my family's graves and put yellow roses around on all the gravestones. Yellow roses was my mother's favorite flower. And so I was trying to think of a book. What's a book about death? And a book that reminds me of my mother. And I came up with this, and this is so torn up, but this is Charlotte's Web. It's in terrible condition. But the reason why that reminds me of my mother, and I might have told this story before because I tell it all the time, is that I was a little girl and I was reading, not this particular book, I think this belonged to my kids. When I was reading it, I started crying when Charlotte dies. So, sorry, spoilers. And my dad heard me sobbing, and he came running into the room. He's like, "What's the matter?" And he realized the book was upsetting me, so he took the book away and he told me to go outside and play. And I was horrified because, of course, that's not the end of the book. So I had to go to my mother to get the book back. And so this book, is probably my earliest encounter with death in a book, and also reminds me of my mother. So Charlotte's Web, that would be the one, something autumnal that makes me think of the fall. Then the next date is November 3rd. That's our election day this year. So I thought of this book, The Last Hurrah by Edwin O'Connor, which is an excellent book. I think it's set in the 50s when TV first started to come in. And there's this old school politician, kind of a Tammany Hall type, mover and shaker. And then there's an upstart kind of upcoming, a more, he presents better. He's like a stuffed shirt type. And he does better on TV than this guy does. And so it's a really, really interesting, absorbing account of the shifts, how things are shifting, and how there are two different ways of doing politics, and the good and the bad and the ugly about it. Really, really engrossing book. I highly recommend it. So for your election reading pleasure, I recommend that one. Oops, sorry. All right, and then the next one is November 5th. So November 5th, I know it's Guy Fawkes Day over in England, but for me and my husband, it's our wedding anniversary. And that always makes me think of a couple of books because when we met, we were friends for about a year, and then we started dating. We started dating like in December, and then we got married the following November. So it was a month shy of a year where we were actually dating. And when we first started to date, somehow he was over at my apartment, and he noticed the book The Little Prince, or somehow The Little Prince came up. Oh, somebody's printing something. I tell you, there's There's no break for me. Anyway, I locked the door so nobody can come in. All right. So anyway, I read this book out loud. Not this one. I gave him this one. This is a gorgeous pop-up book of The Little Prince, but I read him The Little Prince out loud. And then he decided to return the favor and read me his favorite book at the time, which was The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. So that was something sort of romantic in that year when we started to go out, and then we wound up getting married. 32 years in November. And then the next one is Veterans Day. I don't have this book, and I looked for it. It's another book that I've looked for and I can't find. But I read this out loud to my kids. It's Miracle on Maple Hill. And it makes me think of a fall, even though its focus is really on maple sugaring, which would be in February and early March. But, you know, maple trees makes me think of fall color. And it's set in New England. And it's a really wonderful children's book about a World War II veteran. So Veterans Day is November 11th. A World War II veteran that comes back and he's really shell-shocked and he's not adjusting. And his wife, in sort of a desperate attempt, moves them all out into the woods of Maine, I think it is. And was it Maine or New Hampshire? Anyway, they're living out there, and it's about how nature and the seasons and family and community all heal him this one year that they lived out there. And really, really touching story. So I think that's my favorite story that features a veteran for Veterans Day. And then the last one is my only nonfiction, and I don't have it. I got it out of the library. It's one of those books I really should own because I've read it a couple times. It really influenced me. And it's for Thanksgiving. It's by Barbara Kingsolver. It's called Animal, Vegetable, and Miracle. And it was a bestseller years ago. But it's her sort of manifesto of why she loves gardening and why local food is so important, why it's so profound, why knowing your food and growing your food and being close to your food is profoundly humanizing, and why it's just better for the planet, why it's better for the community, just everything good about that. And in the book, she talks about, she's kind of anti-Christian actually, but she talks about how Thanksgiving is like her high holy holiday because it's all about the harvest. And so it really makes me think about, and she talks about how she was trying to raise her own turkeys and she just never could do it well. It's a very interesting book, and I found it really compelling. It influenced me really deeply, even though at times I found her a bit irritating as a person maybe, but I really, really found it to be a really profound analysis of how we need to live better and live closer to nature and take responsibility for things, and just how much better the world would be if we did that. So those are my 13 books, though I cheated and I put 2 in there for September, I think. But it was North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell, Callista by John Henry Newman, or Helen by Evelyn Waugh for September Feast Saints' Days. Rosh Hashanah, it was All of a Kind Family by Sidney Taylor. Michaelmas on the 29th of September, Tom Brown's School Days. October 1st, Story of the Soul. October 4th, G.K. Chesterton's St. Francis of Assisi. Halloween, MacBeth by Shakespeare. November 1st, Jane Eyre for the time change. November 2nd, Charlotte's Web. November 3rd, The Last Hurrah by Edwin O'Connor. November 5th, I got 2 in there too, The Little Prince and Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. For Veterans Day, November 11th, Miracle on Maple Hill. I forget who wrote that. And then for Thanksgiving, Animal, Vegetable, Miracle by Barbara Kingsolver. So wow, a long video. Sorry about that. So I gotta go start making dinner. So I will talk to you later. Take care. Bye-bye.